proclaimed by the Moonbound prologue. The night air was heavy with the scent of pine, frost, and rose petals. A crimson moon hung unnaturally large over the Blackthorn Estate, casting a blood-hued glow across its looming towers and ancient stone. The snow outside fell in a hush, but within the manor's candlelit halls, laughter and music rang like church bells through bone. Alaric Vane stood at the base of the grand staircase, wrapped in shadows, his dark hair slightly damp from the snow melting off his cloak. His broad shoulders bore the mantle of an alpha, but tonight, just for tonight, he was a groom, a man, and his heart was not stone. Not yet. Isolde emerged at the top of the stairs like something summoned from myth, her gown shimmering silver in the candlelight, every step echoing with elegance and secrets. Her eyes, the color of winter storms, locked on his. Her smile was cold porcelain, but her beauty was unmatched. The room held its breath as Alaric climbed the steps to meet her. He swept her into his arms. "Welcome home, Isolde," he murmured against her ear, his voice rough silk. She laughed, a sound like shattered glass. "Home, at last." The guests, shifters from every corner of the Northern Territories, held in celebration. Glasses clinked. Old wolves thumped their canes. The blood moon rose higher, and the wind outside began to howl like something ancient had been awakened. They crossed the threshold of the East Wing, the bridal suite prepared just for them. The doors groaned open, as if reluctant to witness what came next. Behind them, the revelers drank deeper. The fireplace inside roared with unnatural flame. Isolde's fingers tangled in his shirt. Her eyes glimmered. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. He paused. "Feel what?" Her smile twisted. "The manor. It's listening." Before he could answer, a gust of freezing air burst through the windows. Candles snuffed out. The fire hissed to embers. The room dimmed until only the red glow of the blood moon bathed them in shadow. And then, screaming, it echoed through the East Wing. Not hers. Not his. Something else. Something old. Doors slammed shut, one by one, like dominoes falling through time. The temperature dropped so sharply. Frost formed across the window glass in delicate, skeletal patterns. Alaric's breath fogged in the air. Isolde clutched his chest, her nails cutting into his skin. Then her body jerked. She gasped, her eyes wide, and a single word passed her lips. "Alaric." Blood bloomed across the bodice of her gown, dark and sudden, as if spilled from nowhere. Her body convulsed. He caught her, fell with her to the cold marble floor, his heart thundering louder than any war drum. "No, no, Isolde, stay with me." Her lips parted, her pupils blew wide, and then she stilled. Silence fell over Blackthorn Manor like a burial shroud. The guests found him hours later, kneeling in a pool of her blood, her lifeless body cradled in his arms. His face was blank. His voice was gone. The East Wing was sealed that very night. No one spoke of the wedding again. They buried her in the Blackthorn, crypt by the frozen river. But late at night, when the wind slices through the trees, when the frost creeps up the window panes, there are those who still hear her. A whisper, soft, lingering. She never left. Chapter 1. The coach wheels crunched against the frozen earth as it wound its way through the blackened pines, the last outpost of civilization vanishing behind a curtain of snow. Clara Wren sat huddled beneath her worn wool coat, the hem frayed, her gloved fingers curled tight around the satchel resting in her lap. Her breath fogged the small glass window beside her, but she didn't wipe it clean. There was no point. She knew what waited beyond the frost-touched trees. She'd seen it every night in her dreams for the past month. Blackthorn Estate. It loomed in her visions like a memory she wasn't supposed to have. Cold, monolithic, impossible. Stone turrets lost in mist. Windows like watchful eyes. And a single, ancient door that never quite stayed shut. She swallowed hard as the trees thinned, the road opening to a long, ice-slick drive. The iron gates had long since rusted, but they hung open now, like the manor was waiting for her. "End of the road," muttered the coachman as the horses whinnied uneasily. Clara turned to him. He hadn't spoken much during the long ride north. Not since she told him her destination. His mouth was tight now, his eyes flicking toward the towering structure ahead with a mixture of fear and pity. "You sure this is where you want to be, miss?" he asked, voice low. "Not too late to turn back." Clara stepped down into the snow, her boots crunching softly. The wind tore at her coat, held past the ancient trees. She tilted her chin up toward the mansion, where the windows flickered with faint orange light. Something about the place coiled tight in her chest, like a warning she'd felt her whole life. But she'd already heard the whisper. "She's waiting." "No," she said softly. "I have to be here." He didn't press her further. He turned the coach around without another word, his horses eager to be gone. And then she was alone. She crossed the threshold of the estate grounds, the snow swallowing her footsteps. Blackthorn Manor rose before her. 3 stories of Gothic stone and frost-bitten ivy. The roof pitched high with jagged spires like it had been built to keep something in, not out. Gargoyles clung to the corners of the facade, their mouths open in frozen screams. Clara's breath hitched. She could feel them already. Spirits. Not just one. Many. The air shimmered with something cold and unseen, brushing the back of her neck like invisible fingertips. She tightened her grip on her satchel and climbed the stone steps to the massive front door, where knocker shaped like a wolf's head waited, its metal teeth bared. Before she could raise it, the door creaked open. A man stood in the shadowed threshold, dressed in crisp black, coat tailored collar high, his silver hair combed neatly back from a stern, lined face. His eyes were the color of slate and sharper than glass. "Miss Clara Wren," he said, not a question. "Yes," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "I am Everett, the steward. You're expected." He turned without another word, leaving the door yawning behind him. Clara stepped inside, the warmth of the manor wrapping around her like silk laced with iron. The door shut behind her with a sound like finality. The foyer was vast and dimly lit by wall sconces. A grand staircase coiled upward like a serpent of oak and velvet. Shadows danced along the high walls, where portraits of wolves and dead-eyed ancestors watched her pass. "You'll find the children in the east drawing room after supper," Everett said as he led her deeper into the house. "You'll be given quarters on the 2nd floor, away from the master's wing. Breakfast is served at dawn, supper at dusk. Do not go beyond the library after dark." Clara blinked. "Why?" He didn't slow. "Because the master prefers solitude." The master. The name had been in the letter her uncle forwarded. Dr. Elias Moreau, her guardian in name, if not in presence. He had arranged her position at Blackthorn after some old debt was called in. And her employer? Alaric Vane, alpha of the Blackthorn pack, brooding widower, wealthy recluse, and by all accounts haunted. They passed tall doors and quiet hallways, the manor groaning softly as it settled into night. Clara caught glimpses, flickers of movement just beyond the corner of her eye. A pale woman with a veil drifting past a mirror. A child's laughter in an empty room. "Do you live alone?" she asked. Everett's eyes flicked to hers. "There are the children, and a few staff who keep to their duties. You'll find this is not a house for chatter." He stopped before a set of double doors. "The master will see you now." Clara's stomach twisted. The doors opened, and there he was. Alaric Vane stood before the hearth, tall and still as a statue carved from shadow. His dark suit fit his frame like it had been stitched straight to muscle and bone. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, hair like midnight ink, and eyes, when he finally turned to look at her, golden and wild beneath the surface, like a beast lived just behind them. Clara froze. Every instinct screamed danger, not from violence, from recognition. His gaze pinned her, unmoving, unreadable. Then, just for a flicker, his nostrils flared. He'd caught her scent. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the mask. Human. Female. And something more. "You're the new Nanny," he said at last, his voice low and rough, like it had been dragged through gravel. "Yes," Clara managed. Clara Wren. A beat of silence passed between them. "You'll keep to the children. You'll not enter the East Wing. And you'll stay out of the woods after dusk. Is that understood?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Everett will show you to your quarters." He turned back to the fire, just like that, dismissed. But Clara didn't move. Not yet. There was something wrong about him. Not in his appearance. He was devastating, impossibly handsome in the way ancient things sometimes are, but in the tension coiled beneath his skin, like his body was holding something back with every breath. She felt it again, the whisper in her mind. He's not what he seems. Everett touched her elbow. She turned without a word and followed him down another long corridor. Her quarters were small but warm. A canopy bed, a basin, a mirror too fogged to reflect much. As Everett departed, she took a long breath and let her satchel fall to the bed. Silence wrapped the room like a cocoon, until she felt it, a chill. She turned toward the window, drawn by something she couldn't name. Snowflakes drifted past the glass, but her breath caught. There, standing just outside behind the frost, a woman in silver lace, watching her. Clara blinked. Gone. She backed away from the window, heart pounding. Her hands trembled as she lit a single candle by the bedside. The flame flickered wildly, casting long shadows across the walls. She sat on the edge of the bed, closing her eyes. "You promised you'd be stronger than this." And then she heard it, a voice, soft, intimate, right beside her ear. "Clara." She froze. The candle sputtered. Her skin turned to ice. Slowly she turned. No one there. The room was empty, but she knew what she'd heard. A whisper wrapped in longing, and something darker. She stood, heart galloping in her chest. And this time, when she looked in the mirror, there was someone else standing behind her. A pale figure, a woman in a blood-soaked bridal veil. And just before the image shattered, she smiled. Chapter 2. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Clara's room, casting elongated shadows that danced across the wooden floor. The events of the previous night lingered in her mind. The whisper, the apparition in the mirror, and the unsettling presence that seemed to permeate Blackthorn Estate. Determined to fulfill her duties, Clara made her way to the east drawing room, where she was to meet the children. The corridor was silent, the only sound her footsteps echoing against the stone walls. As she approached the room, she heard the faint rustle of paper and the soft scratch of a pencil. Inside, 2 children sat at a small table. The girl, Adeline, had long, dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for her age. She was drawing intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. Beside her sat a boy, Elias, who appeared younger, his gaze distant as he stared out the window. Clara cleared her throat gently. "Good morning. I'm Clara, your new nanny." Adeline looked up, her eyes meeting Clara's with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're the one who sees them, aren't you?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Sees who?" Adeline held up her drawing. It depicted a woman in a flowing white dress, her face obscured by a veil. The lady in white. She walks the halls at night. Clara took the drawing, her hands trembling slightly. "Have you seen her?" Adeline nodded solemnly. "She watches us. She watches you." Elias turned to Clara, his voice barely above a whisper. "She cries in the East Wing." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Thank you for telling me. If you ever feel scared, you can come to me." The children nodded, returning to their drawings. Clara sat with them, her mind racing with questions. Who was the lady in white? And why did she feel such a strong connection to this place? As the day wore on, Clara noticed that Alaric Vane avoided her. He was a presence felt more than seen, his footsteps echoing in distant corridors, his voice a murmur behind closed doors. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he was always aware of her, watching from the shadows. That night, unable to sleep, Clara wandered the halls of the estate. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. As she ascended the grand staircase, she paused, sensing a presence. At the top of the stairs stood Alaric, shirtless, his chest heaving as if he'd been running. His eyes glowed with a golden hue, and his gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough. Clara took a step forward. "I couldn't sleep." Alaric's jaw tightened. "You need to leave, before I can't let you go." Chapter 3. The days passed in a strange quiet, like the breath held before a storm. Blackthorn Estate, with its endless corridors and ivy-laced stone, wrapped itself tighter around Clara like a shroud. She could feel it watching her, breathing with her. Every shadow seemed to lean in when she passed. Every window reflected her shape with just a moment's delay. And somewhere behind the locked doors of the east wing, something stirred. But none of it unnerved her more than the man himself. Alaric Vane. He was absence, wrapped in heat, a silence made of longing. She rarely saw him, but when she did, when those piercing, gold-flecked eyes met hers, Clara felt something primal shift inside her. Something wild. Something fated. She was in the library when she noticed him that morning. He didn't speak, just stood in the threshold, shoulder pressed against the old wood, watching her from the shadows. His gaze swept her like a storm front, slow, inevitable, devastating. Clara felt her pulse quicken, her fingers clumsily losing their place in the book she held. She cleared her throat and tried to sound unaffected. "Do you ever read anything in here? Or just stalk the innocent help?" A pause. Then that low, dangerous voice rumbled from him like distant thunder. "The help shouldn't talk back." Clara turned to face him fully. "And yet here I am." Alaric's jaw ticked, his eyes darkening. But he said nothing, just stepped away from the doorframe and vanished into the hall with the quiet grace of a predator. She didn't see him again for the rest of the day, but she felt him, in the way the hairs on her neck rose near doorways, in the ache between her ribs, in the way her dreams twisted with golden eyes and snarling heat. The children were her anchor. Adeline had grown attached, often slipping her hand into Clara's as they walked the long corridors, humming little tunes about ghosts and shadows. Elias rarely spoke, but he would sit beside her for hours while she read aloud, his small body trembling slightly whenever the wind howled too loudly beyond the windows. It was Adeline who spoke of the East Wing again. "I heard her again last night," she said softly as Clara tucked her in. "She was crying and calling your name." Clara's fingers stilled on the edge of the blanket. "You're certain?" Adeline nodded, eyes wide. "She said your name like she knew you, like she was waiting for you." That night, Clara lay awake, heart thudding with dread and something more dangerous. Curiosity. A pull she didn't understand, a hunger she couldn't explain. She rose from bed, her nightgown brushing her ankles like whispering silk, and padded toward the east wing. The door was still locked, but it rattled against the frame as if something behind it was desperate to be free. She backed away, breath hitching. "Stay out of there." The voice was behind her, sharp and growled. Clara spun, and there he was, Alaric. Shirtless again, his skin sheened with sweat, muscles coiled like something fighting its own nature. His eyes weren't just watching her, they were devouring her. "You shouldn't be wandering the halls at night," he said, stepping closer. "I wasn't wandering," she lied. "I heard a noise." Alaric's nostrils flared. "You're a terrible liar." Clara held her ground, chin lifting. "And you're a terrible host." His lips curved, not quite a smile, more like a warning. "You don't understand what you're playing with, Clara." Her name in his mouth was fire. She felt it in her spine, her knees. "Then explain it to me," she said. He was before her now. Close enough she could feel the heat rolling off his body. His breath stirred the hair near her ear. "There are things in this house that don't sleep, and some that don't want to." Her heart thundered in her chest. "Are you one of them?" His hands slammed the wall on either side of her head. She gasped, caged between his body and the cold stone. His voice dropped to a growl. "You don't know what I am." Clara's breath came in sharp, shallow gulps. "Then show me." And for a heartbeat he almost did. His lips were inches from hers, his chest brushing hers with every ragged inhale. Her hands ached to touch him, to trace the scars across his shoulders, to feel the man beneath the beast. But he slammed a hand against the stone behind her head, snarling, "Don't tempt the beast." Then he stepped away, his control fraying visibly as he turned his back to her and disappeared into the shadows, leaving her trembling, and more afraid of her own longing than of anything behind that locked east wing door. Chapter 4. The nights at Blackthorn Estate had grown colder, and with the chill came something else. Something not of this world. Clara couldn't explain it, couldn't put it into words, but every time she closed her eyes it was there. Whispers, low, hissing, almost unintelligible, but they filled the spaces between breaths, the edges of her consciousness. A voice, no, voices, laced with grief and longing, as though the house itself mourned. But for what? The servants no longer looked her in the eye when they passed, as though something unseen had cast a shadow over her. The children, too, were quieter, though Elias had been more restless. He hadn't spoken of the lady in white for days, but Clara could feel the tension growing in him, a wordless dread. It was on the 5th night, after another sleepless stretch of hours, that it happened again. Clara was reading by the fire in her small room, the crackling of the flames mingling with the wind howling outside. Her book, a dusty relic from the library, was forgotten in her lap as her eyes roamed the corners of the room. She saw it then, the faintest shimmer by the window. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but when she looked again, there she was, a figure, a woman, tall and pale, standing in the moonlight. Silver lace glimmered around her, ethereal like a spectral bridal gown. Her dark hair cascaded in waves, framing a face that Clara couldn't quite make out, but that she felt deep in her chest. The figure was there, but somehow not there. An illusion or something more. Clara didn't know. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman turned toward her. Her lips moved, though no sound emerged. And Clara, foolishly perhaps, stepped closer. The figure's eyes locked with hers, and for an instant Clara felt a wave of emotion so fierce it nearly brought her to her knees. It was as if the woman had reached through time itself to touch her heart. Pain, anguish, loneliness, and something else, something raw, primal. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but the figure was gone. The window was empty. The glass was cold to the touch, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. Her skin prickled, an icy coldness settling over her. The whispers were louder now, clearer. "She doesn't like you." Clara blinked, looking around, trying to steady her breath. But the voice wasn't coming from the walls this time. It was coming from behind her. She spun, her heart pounding in her ears, but no one was there. The voice was softer now, more distant. "Leave this place. Leave before she does." Clara froze. Her eyes darted around, but the shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, as if the house itself were conspiring against her. The whispers were back, pulling at her consciousness, tugging at her resolve. There was a sudden knock at the door. Clara jumped, the sound breaking through the tension like a thunderclap. She opened the door to find Adeline standing in the hallway, her small face pale with fear. "You heard it, didn't you?" the girl whispered. Clara nodded, the weight of her own fear making her chest tight. Adeline's eyes were wide. "She doesn't like you. The lady in the window. She watches you. Who is she? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adeline shook her head. I don't know, but she's bad. She's always been bad. Clara kneeled down in front of the girl. Adeline, who is she? The child hesitated, her lips trembling before she spoke. Mama says she was here before us, before Papa and the wolves. She's the one who never left. The words hit Clara like a cold gust of wind. She stood up, her thoughts spiraling. Before her, before Alaric, before the wolves, the house had secrets. Secrets that were buried deep within its ancient walls. A chill washed over her as she glanced at the hall. She could still hear the whispers, but they were softer now, quieter, picking up again as the night deepened. She's in the library, Adeline murmured, eyes wide as if she were hearing the whispers herself. She's waiting for you there. Clara's heart raced as she turned toward the dark hallway. She had to know. There was something about the woman in the silver lace, something Clara couldn't shake. It felt like a thread woven through her soul, pulling her in ways she couldn't explain. I'll be back soon, she said softly, trying to sound reassuring. Adeline didn't reply, only watched Clara with that strange, knowing gaze that unsettled her even more than the voices. The library was quiet when Clara entered. The towering shelves of books stretched into darkness, the only light the faint glow from the fireplace in the other room. She stepped lightly across the cold stone floor, the sound of her shoes muted by the thick carpet. And there, in the dimmest corner, behind a row of leather-bound tomes, she saw it, a journal. A single book, its spine cracked, the leather worn from years of neglect. Clara hesitated only a moment before she reached for it. The pages inside were yellowed, brittle, the ink faint in some places, sharp in others. It was handwritten, the script elegant, but with a certain hurried quality, as if the writer feared time running out. Clara's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, each one revealing fragments of someone's life, someone's thoughts. The name scrawled across the last page sent a chill up her spine. Isolde. Her breath hitched. Was this the woman in the window? The one who haunted the estate, who watched her in the shadows? Clara's mind raced as she read on. The final entry was short, but it was enough to freeze the blood in her veins. If he touches her, he'll lose control again. Clara slammed the journal shut, the sound reverberating through the empty library. The room felt colder now, darker. Her mind spun with the implications of what she had just read. Alaric, his wolf, the ghost of his past, the woman in silver lace. Was this what the whispers meant? What the children feared? And what about her? Why was she here? Why was she tied to it all? As the weight of the journal settled into her bones, Clara knew one thing for certain. She had to leave the house. She had to escape before the secrets of Blackthorn Estate consumed her, too. But even as she thought it, she heard the faintest sound, a whisper in the walls, a voice soft but clear. Clara! It wasn't her name. It was a command, and it came from the direction of the East Wing. Chapter 5. The storm hit without warning. One moment, the sky above Blackthorn Estate was a dull, bruised gray. Then the wind howled in from the north, sharp and biting. Snow, thick and relentless, began to fall in heavy sheets, blanketing the earth, smothering everything in a veil of white. The world outside ceased to exist, swallowed whole by the tempest. Clara stared out the window of her small room, watching as the trees swayed violently in the wind, their branches bent beneath the weight of the snow. The world beyond the walls of Blackthorn had vanished, replaced by the cold, unfeeling wilderness. It was as if the house itself had become trapped in a timeless, frozen moment. A prison, but inside it was warmer. Too warm. The air thick with unspoken words, with tension simmering beneath the surface, like a storm ready to break. The staff had left. Their absence was almost immediate, as though the snowstorm had given them permission to abandon the estate, leaving Clara, the children, and Alaric alone in the vast, eerie mansion. alone with the ghosts that seemed to haunt every corner of the place, and with the weight of Alaric's silence. He was still avoiding her. The coldness between them had become palpable, though Clara knew it wasn't really coldness at all. It was something else, something deep, raw, dangerous. She could feel the pull of it, like a magnet drawing her closer to him, even as he pushed her away. In the grand dining room, the children were quiet, gathered around the fire as they ate. The wind outside rattled the windows, but inside it was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Clara found herself watching them, Adeline, Elias, and then her gaze shifted to the door. To him. Alaric stood at the far end of the room, leaning against the wall, his arms folded across his chest, his eyes fixed on the flames. His broad shoulders were tense, his face unreadable. The flickering light from the hearth danced across the sharp lines of his jaw, the hard planes of his face. He looked almost like a statue, frozen, unmoving. But Clara knew better. She could feel the weight of his presence. It pressed against her, a constant force. His wolf was never far behind, always just beneath the surface, restless. She could almost hear it growling inside of him, clawing at the edges of his control. And she knew without a doubt that it was her presence, her being here, that was making it worse. The pull between them was undeniable. She could see it in the way his eyes flickered toward her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his breath would hitch when she entered the room. It was as if he couldn't decide whether to fight it or to give in, to deny what they both knew was happening, and neither of them could stop it. The children's voices broke her from her thoughts. Adeline was showing Clara a new drawing, her small face beaming with excitement. But Clara's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about Alaric, about the way he had looked at her that morning, his eyes dark with something she couldn't quite name. Adeline's voice rose in excitement. "Look, Miss Clara, it's the lady in white. I drew her just like you saw her." Clara's stomach twisted at the sight of the drawing. It was an image of the woman in the silver lace, standing by the window. But this time her face was different. Her eyes were wide and empty, hollow. "That's very good, Adeline," Clara murmured, forcing a smile, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't focus. Not now. Adeline tilted her head, her innocent eyes searching Clara's face. "You don't like her, do you?" Clara froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Adeline's expression darkened. "She's not nice. She doesn't want you here. She doesn't like you." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Who doesn't like me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The lady," Adeline said, her words soft but heavy with meaning. "She says you're not supposed to be here. She says you're going to make him hurt." The air in the room seemed to freeze, the words hanging between them like a cloud of smoke. Clara felt a coldness creep down her spine. This wasn't just a child's imagination. It couldn't be. "I'm not going to hurt anyone," she said, her voice stronger now. She turned to look at Alaric, who still stood by the fire, his back to them. But he wasn't looking at her. She felt a chill race up her back, the hairs on the back of her neck standing at attention. Alaric's presence was a pressure now, heavy and overwhelming. His shoulders were taut, his jaw clenched, his entire being bristling with something wild, something dangerous. Clara swallowed, her pulse quickening. She had never felt so acutely aware of him before. It was like the room had shrunk, closing in on her. Adeline's voice cut through the silence. "You don't know what she can do, do you? She can make him angry." Clara turned slowly to face the child. Her throat was dry. "What are you talking about, Adeline?" But before the child could answer, the sound of the storm outside grew louder. The wind howled, the windows rattling in their frames. And then in the distance, almost drowned out by the storm, a single, haunting sound echoed through the walls of the mansion. A wolf's howl. It was raw, primitive, full of pain and longing. It made Clara's blood run cold, her heart skip a beat. Alaric's body tensed immediately, his hands curling into fists at his sides. His eyes flicked toward the window, the amber glow of his gaze sharper than ever before. His lips parted, and Clara saw the flash of his teeth. Then a sound louder now, closer. The distinct scraping of claws against glass. Clara's breath hitched. She spun toward the window, just in time to see them. Claw marks appearing across the pane, deep and jagged as though something or someone was trying to break through. The marks left behind were unmistakable, the force behind them enough to shake the very foundation of the house. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. Alaric's eyes locked with hers, his expression darker than ever. A storm was brewing, but it wasn't just the one outside. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low, hoarse. "Before I can't let you go." Chapter 6. The wind howled outside, its fury only matched by the storm that raged within the walls of Blackthorn Estate. The fire in the hearth crackled, its light dancing in the gloom, casting long shadows across the grand hall. Yet the cold seemed to seep through, creeping into Clara's bones as she stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the blizzard outside. Snow whipped through the air, swirling in the darkness, but it was the heat inside that unsettled her. The tension that vibrated between the walls, between her and Alaric, was unbearable. It had been days since the storm trapped them here, isolated, alone. The children had retreated into their rooms, the silence of the house heavy with the knowledge that things were shifting, changing at an alarming pace. The mansion, always so still, now felt as though it was holding its breath. And so was Clara. She could feel it, the pull between them, something powerful, primal. She had heard the howl of the wolf outside, had seen the scratches across the window pane, proof that the beast, the one Alaric fought to control, was closing in. And yet it was more than that. It was something inside of her that responded to the pull of him, a deep ache that clawed at her from within, a hunger, a need. But it was the things Alaric had said earlier, in that quiet, almost haunted tone, that still echoed in her mind. "You need to leave," he'd said, "before I can't let you go." The words had haunted her in the silence that followed, a chill sweeping through her as the storm outside raged on. What had he meant? What was it about her that drew him, yet terrified him so? She had felt his restraint, the way he fought himself, but it only made her wonder more. Clara had grown used to the whispers, the cold spots, the flickering shadows that followed her through the mansion. But tonight, something felt different. The air was thick with something she couldn't name, and she was restless. Every part of her screamed to move, to discover what was hidden in the dark corners of the mansion. She could feel it, feel the presence of the woman in white, the one who haunted the halls. Isolde. Clara stepped away from the window, the wind outside pressing against the glass as though it were alive. She turned toward the hallway, where Alaric's scent still lingered. Wood and earth, musk and something else, something more primal. It was intoxicating, but it was also dangerous. She knew that. She could feel it. Tonight she would get answers. The east wing of Blackthorn Estate was as haunting as it was vast. Cold, silent, the floors creaked beneath her feet as she moved deeper into the shadows of the mansion. The whispers grew louder here, as though the very walls were alive, holding secrets, memories of things long past. She stepped cautiously, drawn to the door at the far end of the hall, the one she had never dared open. It was there that she felt it most strongly, the pull. The door was locked, but Clara was not deterred. She had grown used to unlocking things, both physical and spiritual. She fumbled in her pockets for the key she'd found in one of the old chests in the library. The key that had led her here. The lock clicked open with a faint groan, and the door creaked as it swung inward. The room beyond was dark, save for the faint light of the moon that filtered through a set of tall, narrow windows. But Clara could feel the presence of something, or someone watching her. She stepped cautiously inside, her breath catching in her throat. The air was colder here, colder than anywhere else in the mansion. And then there was the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. She spun, her heart in her throat, only to find Alaric standing there, his towering figure filling the doorway. His gaze was unreadable, his features carved in shadow. His eyes, however, were blazing with something wild, something fierce, something that made her blood race. "Clara!" His voice was low, rasping a warning. Her pulse quickened. "What is this place, Alaric?" He took a step forward, the floor creaking beneath his heavy boots. "It's where things go to die." There was a heaviness in his words, in his tone, that made her shiver. And yet there was something more, something she could almost touch, an unbearable weight pressing down on them both, suffocating. "Why are you here?" His question came in a strained whisper, his voice thick with something darker, something deeper than she had ever heard from him before. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "I need to know what happened to Isolde," she said, her voice shaking despite herself. "I need to know what happened to her and what's happening to me." For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant sound of the storm outside. And then, as if he couldn't hold it back any longer, Alaric stepped forward, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders, his grip gentle but firm. His eyes searched hers, and in that moment, Clara saw something she hadn't seen before, a deep, guttural pain, the kind that only those who had been torn apart could understand. "Clara!" His voice trembled, the words breaking through the walls of restraint he had so carefully built. "You don't know what you're asking." He swallowed hard, his chest rising with each breath. "You're mine, and I'm yours, but it's not safe. You don't know what you're getting into." Clara's heart hammered in her chest as the truth hit her like a wave. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" she whispered, her mind spinning, struggling to make sense of the chaos that was now swirling around her. He closed his eyes for a moment, as though summoning the strength to continue. "You're my fated mate. You always have been." His voice cracked. "But if I claim you, if I allow myself to truly bond with you, I risk losing control. And when that happens, I will become something uncontrollable. A beast, Clara, a beast that could destroy everything in its path." The words hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating like a curse. Clara's breath caught in her throat. A beast. He was a beast and she was his. "Then why?" she asked, her voice barely audible, trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "But every moment I'm near you, I'm losing the fight." Clara's mind was spinning. The pieces were falling into place, and yet she felt more lost than ever. She wanted to run. She wanted to escape from the pull of him, from the overwhelming force of their connection. But she couldn't. She couldn't tear herself away. There was a ghost in the house, a force that wanted her gone. And Alaric was the key to everything. He was the only one who could help her. But at what cost? Later that night, after the storm had passed, Clara lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts churned. Alaric's words had haunted her, wrapped themselves around her like a chain. She had never felt so powerless, so at the mercy of something she couldn't understand. She didn't know what time it was when she heard the sounds. Soft at first, almost like a whisper. But it was there. Something was moving through the house. Clara sat up, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. She reached for the lamp on the bedside table. But before her fingers could touch it, the temperature in the room dropped, and a figure materialized in the doorway. The woman in silver lace. Clara gasped, her blood freezing in her veins. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure moved closer, her presence like ice, her eyes hollow, empty. And then, just as Clara's vision blurred, her body gave way to darkness. The next thing Clara knew, she was lying on the cold floor of the east wing, her body shivering, frozen to the bone. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and there, just inches from her, was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, urgent, frantic. Alaric. She tried to speak, to call out, but her lips were numb and her vision was clouded. She could see him now, his silhouette, dark and dangerous, moving toward her, his breath harsh in the silence. But as his form loomed over her, her eyes widened in horror. A blood-soaked veil was draped across her chest. Chapter 7. The estate, still reeling from the aftermath of Clara's strange, near-fatal encounter in the East Wing, seemed to hold its breath as the wind raged outside. Blackthorn Estate, in its grandeur and its decay, had always been a fortress of silence, a place where secrets clung to the stone walls like ivy. Yet today something had shifted. The air felt charged, as if the very foundations of the house were trembling in anticipation. Clara stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. The distant howl of wolves echoed through the trees, distant but somehow closer, as if the pack was gathering. She could feel the unease in her chest, a lingering discomfort that she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the cold. No, it was something deeper, more primal. It was Alaric. It was Lord Thorn. She shivered as the thought of him crossed her mind. The brief, unsettling moments she had spent alone with him had left a taste of iron in her mouth. Thorn, with his piercing gaze and the strange tension that hung between them, had unsettled her. There was something about him, something dark and dangerous that seemed to pull at her, like a force she couldn't fight. And now, as she turned away from the window and walked through the grand hall of Blackthorn Estate, Clara knew that the world she was beginning to understand was about to be upended once more. Today, something was different. Today, Lord Thorn was arriving. The door to the estate opened with a groan, and the figure that entered was as imposing as the storm that had raged just hours before. Lord Thorn was a tall man, his dark hair swept back in a manner that spoke of authority, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intelligence. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. He was power personified, an aura of danger and control that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. Clara's pulse quickened the moment she laid eyes on him, her instincts screaming at her to be wary, to step back. But she stood still, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. She had heard of Lord Thorn before, whispers of his cruelty, of his obsession with power and dominance. And yet there was something about him that intrigued her, something that tugged at the edges of her awareness, like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Thorn's gaze locked onto Clara's as he stepped into the room, his eyes narrowing slightly. It was as though he saw straight through her, his gaze calculating, measuring. His lips curled into a half-smile, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ah, the human," he said, his voice smooth and rich, with an edge that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. The one who's captured the alpha's attention. Alaric's presence in the room was immediate, like a shadow stretching across the light. He was standing at the far end of the hall, his posture rigid, his jaw set in a firm line. The tension between him and Thorn was palpable, thick in the air like a brewing storm. Clara could sense it, the unease radiating off both of them. Thorn turned to face Alaric, his expression a study in feigned curiosity. "I've come to check on the pack," he said, his words casual, but there was an underlying sharpness to them. "And to see how things are faring here." His eyes flicked back to Clara, the look in them suddenly predatory. "But I see that you've taken interesting company." Alaric's jaw clenched, his body going tense. "Lord Thorn," he began, his voice steady but carrying a note of warning, "I'm sure your concerns can wait." Thorn's smile widened, but it was cold, calculating. "Concerns?" He tilted his head slightly, his gaze now fixated on Clara. "Oh, I think this is more than a concern, Alaric. You've been housing a human in your home, your pack, your den." His voice grew colder. "Do you not remember the laws of our kind?" Clara's stomach twisted as the weight of his words sank in. She could feel the tension mounting, the undercurrent of something dark and dangerous stirring beneath the surface. Lord Thorn wasn't just here to check on the pack. He had come for something more. Alaric's eyes flashed with a warning, his stance protective as he stepped closer to Clara, positioning himself between her and Thorn. "You're overstepping, Thorn. This is none of your business." Thorn's gaze flicked back to Alaric, and there was something in it, something hungry, something dangerous. "It is my business when the laws of our kind are being broken," Thorn said smoothly, his voice dripping with venom. "The human's presence here is an affront to the pack. She's a liability, a weakness." Clara felt the sting of his words, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't, not with him staring at her like that. There was a part of her that wanted to retreat, to shrink away from his gaze, but another part, something wild, refused to let him intimidate her. "You're wrong," Clara said, her voice steady despite the way her heart was hammering in her chest. "I'm not a liability." Thorn's smile only deepened, his eyes darkening as he stepped closer, the air thickening with the charge of his presence. "Oh, my dear," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You have no idea just how much you are." Alaric stepped forward, his eyes flashing with an intensity that made the air between them crackle. "Enough, Thorn," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll not speak to her that way." But Thorn wasn't done. He turned back to Alaric, his gaze calculating, assessing. "You've violated pack law, Alaric," he said, his voice lowering. "And you've done so in the most selfish way possible. She's a human. She doesn't belong here, not in your world, not in your pack. And the moment you allow her to stay, you risk everything. The pack, your power, your place among us all." Clara could feel the weight of his words settle over her like a shroud, and a cold chill ran down her spine. But it wasn't just the words that unsettled her. It was the way he looked at her, as though he had already claimed her, as though he believed she was already his. The unease in her chest bloomed, curling into something darker. "You want her gone," Clara said, her voice trembling with something she couldn't quite control. "But it's not just the laws, is it?" Thorn's eyes flashed, and for a brief moment, Clara saw something almost imperceptible, a flicker of jealousy. "No," he said softly, his voice darkening with an intensity that made Clara's blood run cold. "It's not just the laws. It's because you belong to Alaric now. And that," he stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. "That is something I can't abide. You'll be mine once the alpha falls." Clara's breath caught in her throat as the full weight of his words hit her. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, suffocating, and she felt a sudden, inexplicable terror rise in her chest. She looked at Alaric, his face hard, his jaw clenched, his body coiled tight with the tension between them. But Thorn wasn't finished. "I've waited too long for this, Clara," he murmured, his voice a deadly whisper. "Once the alpha falls, you'll be mine." Chapter 8. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Clara felt it in her bones. The stillness that hung heavy in the air. A silence that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, steady and oppressive. The days were bleeding together now, each one more suffocating than the last. She had grown used to the house's dark corners, the cold drafts that whispered across her skin. But there was something different now, something shifting beneath the surface. Isolde. The name echoed in Clara's mind as she walked down the narrow hall toward the library. The journals she had found, fragments of a life that had once been vibrant, spoke of a woman consumed by power, love, and the unforgiving darkness that had claimed her. The more Clara learned about Isolde, the more she felt the weight of her presence, like a shadow that never quite left. It was as though the woman's ghost still lingered, watching her with unseen eyes. And it wasn't just Isolde that Clara felt watching her. No, it was something else. A sense of being hunted, of being drawn toward a fate she could no longer deny. Alaric's coldness, his restraint, the pull between them that seemed to twist tighter with each passing moment. It was all tied to the curse that had haunted this house, this family for generations. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as Clara entered the library. The room was vast, its shelves filled with ancient tomes and forgotten knowledge. Dust danced in the beams of light that filtered through the heavy curtains, and Clara found herself drawn to the farthest corner, where an old, weathered book rested on a pedestal. It wasn't just any book. It was a grimoire. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she approached it. The leather binding was cracked, the edges worn and frayed as though it had been touched by many hands over the years. The air around it felt charged, alive with something dark and untamed. She could feel its power pulsing beneath her fingertips as she reached for it. It felt wrong, but it also felt like something she needed to do, as though this book held the answer she had been searching for. She opened it slowly, careful not to damage the fragile pages, and began to read. The words were written in a language she didn't understand, the script flowing like an ancient river, full of secrets and magic. She turned the pages, her fingers trembling, and as she read, the words began to make sense. They spoke of Isolde, of her death, of the curse that had bound her to this place, and of the ritual that had gone wrong. A ritual designed to seal her fate. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she read further. Isolde hadn't just been a Luna. She had been a witch, one of immense power. The ritual she had attempted had been meant to protect the pack, to bind the wolves to her magic. But something had gone wrong. The ritual had summoned forces that were never meant to be called, and Isolde's death had been the price. The curse that had bound Alaric to this house, to this land, was no accident. It had been set in motion by Isolde's own hand. And now Clara understood the truth of it, the reason she had been drawn here, to this place, to Alaric. She was the key. Clara could feel the weight of the knowledge pressing down on her chest. The curse wasn't just about Alaric, it was about her, too. The book spoke of a bloodline, a connection between her and Isolde that Clara couldn't yet comprehend. But one thing was clear. She had been brought here for a reason. To break the curse. To free Alaric. To free herself. And to end the madness that had haunted this place for so long. But how? Her gaze moved to a page that seemed to shimmer before her eyes, the words glowing faintly. It was a spell, a dangerous spell, designed to call the spirits of the dead, to speak with the departed. Clara knew what she had to do. She had to try. There was no other choice. She took a deep breath and began to chant the words. The air in the room seemed to shift, a cold breeze swirling around her as the walls creaked in protest. The candle flames flickered wildly, casting long, twisting shadows across the room. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming faster as she spoke the words of the incantation. For a moment, nothing happened. Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Then, slowly, Clara felt it. A presence, a coldness that seeped into her skin, her bones, as though the very room had come alive with the breath of something ancient. She turned her head, but there was no one there. Only the faintest outline of a figure in the corner of her vision, a shadow that danced at the edges of her perception. A whisper, soft, almost inaudible, brushed against her ear. "You shouldn't have done this," the voice murmured, a chilling rasp that made Clara's blood run cold. Clara's heart raced, but she didn't stop. She continued the chant, the words flowing from her lips, the power of them building in her chest like a storm waiting to break. She had to know. She had to understand. And then the temperature dropped. The air turned frigid, so cold it felt like it was biting into her skin. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps, and she could see the mist forming in front of her lips. The shadows deepened, growing longer, more defined. And with them came the whispers, voices rising from the walls, from the very bones of the house itself. They spoke in languages she didn't understand, but their meaning was clear. "Stop!" the voice in the corner hissed, its tone growing desperate. "You have no idea what you're tampering with." Clara's hand shook as she reached the final line of the chant. The words tumbled from her mouth like a prayer, a plea for answers, for guidance. And then in an instant the room fell silent. The oppressive cold vanished, and the shadows retreated. The air was still, as though everything had stopped waiting. And then she felt it, A cold touch, a hand, ice cold and clammy, wrapped around her throat. Clara gasped, her breath catching in her chest as her vision blurred. Her heart raced, and she fought to pull away, but the grip tightened. The chill of death pressed against her skin, sinking into her very soul. A voice, distorted and hollow, filled her mind, its words sending a jolt of terror through her. He will kill you before he lets you go. The pressure on her throat increased, and Clara choked, unable to breathe. The room spun around her, the shadows closing in, and she knew, deep down, that the curse was not just Alaric's, it was hers too. She had awoken something she wasn't ready to face. With one final, desperate gasp, Clara broke the connection, stumbling backward as the force on her throat vanished. She collapsed onto the cold floor, her hands gripping her neck as she gasped for air, her heart pounding in her ears. The room was still, but she knew she wasn't alone. Chapter 9. The air was thick with tension, thick enough to choke the life from the room. The weight of impending fate pressed down on Clara as she stood on the threshold of the ancient hall. Her breath trembled in the cold air, the taste of fear mingling with the coppery taste of her own heartbeat. The storm outside had faded, but the storm inside the walls of the Vane estate was just beginning. She could feel it. Lord Thorne's arrival had shattered the fragile peace that had existed here, leaving nothing but chaos in its wake. His presence was like a shadow, suffocating and relentless, darkening the corners of her mind. He had come for more than just the pack, he had come for her. And Alaric was already breaking. She could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes flickered with a hunger so raw, so primal, that it made her own skin flush with anticipation and terror in equal measure. Lord Thorne stood tall, his sharp eyes glinting with malice as they fixed on Clara, a smirk curling at the edges of his lips. The scent of power, old and potent, clung to him like a cloak, wrapping around him in a way that made the very air feel like it was tightening. "You know what must be done, Alpha," Lord Thorne said, his voice deep and rumbling, a growl just beneath the surface. "Ancient law binds us all. It is a challenge, and I am claiming what is mine." Clara's heart faltered at the words, her pulse quickening. He wasn't just here for a petty rivalry. No, this was much more than that. Thorne had come for Alaric's title, his power, and for her. Alaric's lips curled in a grimace, his eyes flashing with fury. "You think you can take what's mine, Thorne? You dare challenge me for what is rightfully mine?" Lord Thorne stepped forward, his presence looming over them all. "What is yours? You've kept a human in your house, one not bound to this land. The pack law, my law, demands it. You've broken the sacred bonds of our kind. You're weak, Alpha, and your weakness is your undoing." Clara took a step back, her breath hitching. She could feel the electric charge in the air between the two of them, the friction, the ancient enmity that had sparked into something far darker than rivalry. This wasn't just a fight for control. It was a fight for something much more. Thorne's eyes never left her as he spoke again, his words cold, calculated. "You'll never belong here, human. You're an outsider, and when Alaric falls, I'll take what should have always been mine. You will be mine." Her stomach twisted in disgust, and yet there was something else, something in the way his gaze lingered on her that made her blood run cold, like a whispered promise that she wasn't sure she could ever escape. Alaric's fists clenched at his sides, his entire body rigid with the strain of holding back something far darker. "I won't let you have her. You'll have to kill me first, Thorne, and you won't be the first to try." Thorne chuckled, low and menacing. "Then prepare yourself, Alaric. The challenge is set. We will fight under the blood moon, and the victor shall claim all, including the girl." A shiver ran down Clara's spine as the words settled into the room, like poison creeping into every corner. A challenge, a fight to the death. And she was nothing but a pawn in their game, a game she hadn't asked to play. But deep inside her a fire sparked. She wasn't just going to stand by and watch Alaric fall. She couldn't. Thorn turned on his heel and left, his presence fading with every step, leaving Clara alone with Alaric, alone with the man who was both everything and nothing to her, a dark mystery she couldn't unravel, a force she couldn't resist. Alaric's gaze followed Thorn's retreating form, his jaw clenched tightly, but it was only when he spoke that Clara realized how close to the edge he was. "I have to chain myself," he muttered, his voice low, pained, "to prevent my wolf from coming out." Clara blinked, confused for a moment, until the realization hit her like a thunderclap. "You can't. Alaric, you can't do this. You'll—" "I have no choice, Clara," he interrupted, his voice hard, unforgiving. "If I don't, I won't be able to control it. I won't be able to control him." He looked at her, his eyes flashing with an intensity that made her heart stutter in her chest. "You don't understand. My wolf, he wants to claim what's mine, and I can't let that happen, not like this." Clara's chest ached at the sight of him, torn between the man she had come to care for and the beast that lay beneath his skin. She reached out to him, her fingers brushing his arm, but he flinched away, as though her touch were a brand upon his flesh. "Please don't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said, his voice broken. "If I don't chain myself, I won't be able to stop the beast inside. I'll hurt you. I'll hurt the children. I won't let that happen. Not after everything you've given me." Clara's heart ached, her chest constricting with the pain of it. She knew what this meant. She could see the torment in his eyes, the struggle within him. He was trying to protect them all, protect her. But in doing so, he was pulling away, retreating into himself, locking the beast inside with chains that were as much a prison for him as they were a safeguard. "You're not alone in this," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you face this alone." But Alaric didn't respond. He turned away from her, walking toward the cellar door with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped once more, glancing back at Clara over his shoulder. "Stay away from me, Clara. For your own safety," he warned, his tone hard, final. "Stay away from the chains." But Clara couldn't. She wouldn't. She was already too far gone, already tangled in this world of shadows and secrets. She had to help him. She had to. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, bathing the estate in its cold, silvery light, Clara stood in the empty hallway, torn between her fear for Alaric and her need to stand by his side. The blood moon was coming, and with it, the fight that would change everything. Clara found herself at the cellar door that night, heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the chains calling to her, the dark energy radiating from them like an open wound. She didn't know what she was doing. She only knew that she couldn't let him suffer alone, not like this. As she pushed open the door, her breath caught in her throat. Alaric was there. In the dim light of the cellar, his body was shackled to the stone wall. His face was drawn, pale with pain, and his eyes were filled with an anguish so deep it made her want to scream. But she didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked toward him, every step heavy with the weight of the decision she was about to make. "Clara, no!" he breathed, his voice breaking as she approached. But she ignored him. She stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for the chains that bound him. She could feel the heat of his body, the raw power that pulsed beneath his skin. And without another thought, without a single word of warning, she kissed him. A kiss so deep, so desperate, it ignited something within them both. And then, with a sudden, deafening snap, the chains shattered. Chapter 10. The storm had broken, the winds howling outside in a frenzy, as if the heavens themselves had joined the earth in the battle that raged below. The estate stood under the watchful gaze of the blood moon, its crimson light spilling over the snow-covered grounds, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance with life of their own. The air was thick, electric, alive with the tension of a night that would see blood spilled and destinies rewritten. Inside the manor, the world had grown still. Too still. The walls seemed to hum with the weight of what was coming. Clara could feel it in her bones. The ancient magic that pulsed beneath the surface of the house, the darkness that stirred in the corners of her mind. She had seen it before, the power of the moon, the way it called to Alaric, and the way it drove him to madness. But tonight was different. Tonight, there would be no turning back. Alaric stood before her, his form twisted and strained, as though something deep within him was clawing to break free. His breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes glowing with an animal hunger she had never seen before. The chains that had held him mere hours ago, now, lay shattered at his feet, a symbol of the primal force that had been unleashed. "I won't be able to control him," Alaric growled, his voice hoarse, barely human. The words barely left his lips before his body shuddered violently, as though the wolf inside him was fighting for dominance. He staggered forward, his form contorting as his muscles grew larger, his bones snapping and shifting with sickening cracks. Clara stepped back, her heart thundering in her chest. Her pulse raced, fear and fascination warring within her. She had seen Alaric shift before, but never like this, never with such ferocity, such desperation. The beast within him was clawing its way to the surface, hungry, wild and untamed. "Alaric," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can fight this. You don't have to." But before she could finish, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the manor, interrupting her words. A door slammed open, and there, standing in the doorway with a smirk on his face, was Lord Thorn. His eyes gleamed with triumph as he took in the sight of Alaric's transformation. "So, the beast is finally free," Thorn said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "I wonder how long it would take. You always were weak, Alaric." Alaric's growl filled the room, deep and guttural, as his fangs elongated, his claws slashing through the air like deadly weapons. His once human face was now twisted into a snarl, his eyes glowing with the hunger of the wolf that had taken over him. He took a step forward, muscles rippling with the raw power that coursed through him. "You will regret this," Alaric snarled, his voice thick with fury and primal need. "I will rip you apart." Thorn's smirk only deepened as he slowly drew a dagger from his belt, the silver blade glinting in the blood moon's light. "We'll see about that, Alpha." Without warning, Thorn lunged, the silver blade aimed directly for Alaric's throat. But Alaric was faster. With a roar that shook the walls, he launched himself at Thorn, his claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. The two collided in a whirlwind of fur, muscle, and raw fury, a battle of beasts, each fighting for dominance, for control. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the two werewolves clashed before her. The sounds of flesh tearing, bones cracking, and vicious snarls filled the room. She could feel the force of their battle, the power that radiated from them like an unrelenting storm. But as her gaze shifted, she realized that the battle wasn't the only chaos in the manor. In the corner of the room, a cold, unnatural chill filled the air. Clara's eyes widened as she saw her Isolde, the ghost of Alaric's late wife, her ethereal form floating above the ground, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and sorrow. Her hands were raised, and Clara could feel the raw power of the spirit coursing through the room, filling it with an oppressive weight. Isolde's voice echoed in Clara's mind, her words like a whisper in the wind. "You shouldn't have come here, human. You are nothing but a pawn in this game. Leave now before you doom us all." Clara's heart raced. She had no idea what was happening, no idea how to stop it. But one thing was clear. Isolde was not just haunting the house. She was actively trying to tear it apart. She turned to the grimoire that lay on the table, its pages filled with ancient spells and incantations. The weight of it was almost unbearable as Clara reached for it, her fingers trembling. She had seen the warning in the book, the mention of the curse, the power that Isolde wielded even in death. But now Clara had no choice. She had to act. Opening the book, Clara flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the ancient text for anything that might help. She had no time to waste. The battle between Alaric and Thorn raged on, the air thick with the scent of blood and power, but she could feel it. Isolde's spirit was drawing closer, pulling the very life from the house. Then she found it, a spell, a ritual to banish a restless spirit, to sever the tie that bound it to the mortal realm. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she began to chant the words, her voice trembling as she spoke the incantation aloud. The air around her crackled with energy, and she could feel the magic building, gathering around her like a storm. But as the words left her lips, Isolde's ghost let out a terrible scream, a sound so full of rage and sorrow that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the manor. Clara's body trembled as the spirit's power slammed into her, a wave of cold that knocked her to the floor. Her head spun, her vision blurred, but she forced herself to finish the chant. The last word left her lips with a shudder, and suddenly everything went still. For a moment, Clara thought she had failed, but then a sharp pain exploded in her chest. She gasped, clutching at her heart, as a cold, icy pressure seemed to seep through her veins. Her vision faded, the world around her spinning, her body weak and trembling. Isolde's voice echoed one last time, like a whisper in the wind. "You have freed me, but you have damned us both." And then there was nothing. Clara's vision swam as she collapsed to the floor, the grimoire slipping from her grasp. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body shaking with the strain of the spell, the magic that had coursed through her. Blood trickled from her mouth, staining her lips as she struggled to stay conscious. She heard Alaric's voice through the haze, distant, frantic. "Clara! Clara, no!" But it was too late. The world around her was fading, the last vestiges of her strength slipping away like sand through her fingers. As the darkness closed in, Clara whispered, barely able to form the words, "Did I free you or doom you?" And then everything went black. Chapter 11. The cold grip of darkness that had clutched at Clara's heart released its hold, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air seemed to clear. She awoke with a start, her breath shallow, her body weak and trembling, but alive. The blood that had pooled on the floor around her, the mark of her sacrifice, was already drying, and yet there was something new about the stillness of the room. The tension, the suffocating presence of Isolde's wrath, had lifted, leaving only the quiet whisper of wind against the windows. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she blinked against the dim light, trying to focus. She was no longer alone. Alaric knelt beside her, his large hand gently cradling her face, his touch tender, full of an emotion she had never before seen in him. His brow furrowed in worry, his gaze intense as it bore into hers. "Clara!" he breathed, the weight of her name on his lips like a prayer. "You're awake. Thank the moon." Clara's lips parted as she struggled to speak, but her voice was hoarse, fragile. She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing his with a raw, desperate need. I did it, Alaric. I freed her. Isolde's gone. The curse, it's broken." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered those words, the weight of the moment crashing down upon her. The curse that had haunted him, that had held him prisoner for so long, was finally gone. And yet, with the relief came a quiet sadness, a finality that hung in the air between them. Alaric nodded, his expression unreadable for a moment, before his lips parted in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "It's over," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm free. We're free." His hand tightened around hers, grounding her, as though he feared she might slip away if he let go. The storm that had raged in their hearts for so long had passed, leaving only the fragile silence of a new beginning. But their quiet moment was not to last. There was a sound at the door, a soft knock, tentative, but filled with the weight of 100 eyes watching. Clara turned her head, her heart thudding against her chest as the door creaked open. The pack had arrived. One by one, the wolves entered, their eyes filled with curiosity, respect, and something else, something warmer. They had witnessed the battle that had taken place, the blood that had been spilled, and the power that had been released. They had watched Alaric fight his demons, had seen the depths of his torment, and now they saw him truly free. The children followed close behind, their faces bright with hope, their eyes wide as they took in the scene before them. They had been waiting for this moment, and now, as they stepped forward, they saw it. Clara! No longer just a human outsider, but something more. She was part of them, part of their family, their pack. And in that moment, as the eyes of the wolves and children turned to her, Clara understood. She had always known she was meant for something greater. But now, with the curse broken and the bond between her and Alaric forged, she felt it deep in her bones. This was where she belonged. Alaric rose to his feet, and without a word, he moved toward the center of the room. The others parted, giving him space, their respect for him palpable in the air. Clara, still weak, pushed herself up from the floor, steadying herself as she moved toward him. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw what was happening. Alaric was preparing for something sacred, something ancient. The pack circled around them, their faces a mix of reverence and awe, and Clara could feel the weight of their gaze upon her, though no one spoke. Alaric's hand reached out for hers, his grip firm but gentle as he led her to the center. The air around them grew charged, thick with anticipation, and Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. With the pack watching, Alaric knelt before her, his eyes intense, filled with emotion so deep it seemed to drown out everything else. The moment was heavy with significance, with the future unfolding before them. Clara knew what he was about to do, knew the bond he would offer her was both a gift and a promise, a bond that would tie her not only to him, but to this pack, to their future. Clara Wren! Alaric's voice was low, his words like a prayer. You are my fated mate. You have freed me from my past, and with this bond, I claim you as mine. Will you accept this gift, this promise? Her breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening with emotion. She had come to this place unsure of what her future held, but now, in this moment, it was clear. She had always known deep down that she and Alaric were meant to be, even before the storm, before the chaos. Their souls had already been intertwined, and now, as she gazed into his eyes, she knew she could never turn away. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Alaric, I accept. He reached for the silver dagger at his waist, the blade gleaming with a deadly grace. The wolves around them held their breath as he made a shallow cut along his palm, the blood spilling like a sacred offering. Clara watched, entranced, as he took her hand in his, pressing the wound to her skin. The pain was sharp, but the heat of the blood was searing, a fire that burned its mark into her soul. As the blood mingled between them, the bond ignited. It was as if the very earth beneath their feet trembled with the force of it. Clara's body shuddered, and Alaric's grip on her tightened, his touch possessive, protective. His lips parted, and he whispered a word in a language ancient and forgotten, a prayer to the moon and stars, to the earth and sky, a promise to always protect her, to always stand beside her, no matter what. And in that moment, Clara felt it, the bond, the pull, the irrevocable connection between them. The air around them shimmered, and she could feel the pack's energy, their loyalty, their power, flowing into her. It was a union, not just of flesh, but of spirit. The children, watching with wide eyes, whispered among themselves, their voices full of wonder. One by one, they approached Clara, and it was there, standing before her, their small hands extended, that she felt it again. Their acceptance, their love. They called her mother, and the word was like a balm to her soul. The family she had longed for, the family she had found. The manor, once dark and filled with the weight of sorrow, now seemed lighter, as though a great burden had been lifted. The walls, which had once groaned under the weight of secrets, now hummed with a new energy, one of hope, one of renewal. The curse had been broken, the past had been cast aside, and now, as the pack gathered around her, Clara felt like she truly belonged. But even as she stood there, a part of her still felt the weight of the world pressing in. A part of her could not ignore the lingering sense that their troubles were far from over. Deep in the northern woods, beyond the sight of the manor and the watchful eyes of the pack, a silver-eyed figure stood, hidden among the trees. His gaze was fixed on the manor, on the scene unfolding before him. His expression was unreadable, cold, as he watched Clara with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine, even for miles away. His lips parted, a single word escaping in a whisper to the wind. She woke it. And with that, the storm began to stir once again.